Hello, my name is Kinlock and I really like musicals, so when I go see a musical, I have a lot of thoughts and I want to get them out of my head. So I'm sharing them now and hopefully you want to hear them, and that's why you're here, because you want to hear what I thought about Dear Evan Hansen. Dear Evan Hansen, I'm going to tell you a little bit about it and then we'll go from there. So the story involves some quite heavy topics. There is discussion of suicide, and while I won't go into that too deeply, it will come up a few times. So if this isn't for you, be elsewhere. That is fine. Go watch some cat videos or something heartwarming. This is not a heartwarming show for a lot of the time. It's a tearjerker, it's a bit gut-wrenching, it's a bit awkward, and it eventually comes to a bit of a resolve that I found to be heartwarming, but it's a bit of a journey getting there. So what is Dear Evan Hansen about? Well, it follows this kid called, can you guess? Evan Hansen. Yeah, that's his name. And he's starting his final year at high school. This is in, middle of Genericville, high school America kind of thing. And he's a very anxious person, and he's doing therapy, he's taking medication, but he's, doesn't really have friends. He is, I guess, just troubled, I don't know, struggling to find a way through the world that doesn't terrify him. And so we meet him and he's writing this letter, and it says, Dear Evan Hansen, because he's been given this assignment by his therapist to write letters to himself to try and change that paradigm and put a positive spin on things. So he's supposed to be saying, Dear Evan Hansen, today is going to be an amazing day because I'm going to get straight A's or whatever it is. But he doesn't do that. He ends up writing something a little bit more negative and was just like, today's going to suck, because he just can't do it. And so we meet Evan Hansen. He's doing that. He lives with his mum, who is a single mum who's doing all the hard worky things that a single parent does, and she's working extra shifts to try and bring in more money to pay for his medication, to pay for his therapy, to pay for their big house. And she is going to night school to try and better herself so that she can give them both a better life. She's conscientious but struggling. She's just like, how does anyone do this? And we meet them, and then we follow Evan to school, and we meet other random people at school, but we wouldn't say friends because Evan doesn't really have friends. There is a bit of an altercation with this kid called Connor, and then it turns out, not too long after that, Connor, this is the trigger warning moment, dies by suicide. And when he dies, he is found with this letter in his hand that says, Dear Evan Hansen, da-da-da-da-da, today's gonna suck, or whatever it says. And they interpret this as a suicide note, and that he was writing it to Evan Hansen, and that they must have been really close friends. That's a fairly reasonable assumption to make, because who writes letters to themselves? But when they approach Evan and they're like, I think this is for you, he's not like, no, I didn't know this guy, I'm sorry about your son, but I didn't know him, because he's a nervous wreck. And so he's just like, yep, me and Connor, yep. Anyway, he sort of tells a small lie that yes, they were friends, but then it just escalates. It snowballs, and soon we have this lore around the fact that they were best friends and they did everything together, and they have all these wonderful memories, and they shared their deepest secrets, and they wrote emails to each other from a secret email account. So it gets a little convoluted. I mean, not as a story for the audience to follow, like it's told very clearly, but in terms of them making their life more complex and difficult, yeah, Evan and his accomplices, who he ropes in, do sort of become part of this like conspiracy. It snowballs, it gets a bit out of control. He ends up doing this really heartfelt speech, and then that goes viral. And so then he gets all this like national attention, and he's just like, now what? Trying to keep his head above water. Meanwhile, he's like getting to know the family really well because they want to hear about the side of their son that they never really saw because it wasn't real. And then Evan's like, well, hey, this is a pretty cool family. Like, why don't I have this picture perfect family like this? And he sort of becomes one of them. And yeah, I'm describing it and it sounds so cringy, but I assure you, when I was watching it, I was right there every step of the way, following Evan Hansen's choices. And even though he makes a lot of mistakes, you could totally see why. And that's what's kind of difficult to understand about this show. So now that we get a bit of an idea of the plot, I want to go back and talk about like the development of the show, because I started following this show probably back in like 2014 when it was still being developed and workshopped and out of town and stuff like that. And it was one to watch because the songwriters, Pasek and Paul, who they had this song cycle thing called Edges that was like really put them on the map, and was like, oh, good songs, very, very young talent. It's like a Broadway sound, but it's a pop sensibility. And wow, do they really want to take something to Broadway? Because this could be like the future of Broadway and musicals. And so what are they going to do next? And what they were doing next was this rarest of all things in Broadway world, which is an original musical. So it's not based on a book, it's not based on someone in real life, it's just an original story that someone plucked out of their brain and decided to tell through musical theatre. And I love that, and we don't see enough of it. So, it was one to watch, and it had sort of a slow development period, but it had Ben Platt on board from an early stage, and they did tryouts in, I think, like Washington, D.C. or something, and then they went to New York and had a significant off-Broadway season, and it got a lot of buzz, and then they took over Broadway, and Ben Platt just belted his brains out every night, and everyone was like, thank you. Yes, you're belting about mental health, and you sound like a cross between a Broadway singer and a pop star, and we are here for it. Yes. So that was kind of like the legacy of this show. It was really celebrated for, approaching topics that were relevant to young people today. And it won a lot of awards, and Ben Platt got a Tony, which he truly deserved, because he's a phenomenal singer and he poured everything into this role. He can act. It's a really demanding role. Ben / Evan, so inseparable. But the character of Evan Hansen, doesn't leave the stage the whole time. He's just in every song. He sings all of them. He's like, I want to do all of the things. It's very impressive. Yeah. So, yes, that happened, and people were like, yay! And then, once Ben sort of moved on and it went to other people and, casts changed and stuff, there was still a lot of buzz around the show and people watching all these young new talents come in, and it's like, oh wow, what a great sort of initiation into the Broadway world. Like, someone that young getting to do such a meaty role, like, that's pretty cool. It's really going to set them up for a good career, right? And so that launched a few careers. We were all having fun, and then they decided to make it into a film. And I don't really want to get into that too much, because where would you even end once you start talking about the film? It's a bit of a Pandora's box, is that the thing? A bit of a rabbit hole, because there were just a bunch of weird, bad decisions made, and it's kind of an uncanny film to watch. Like, it's not unwatchable, it's just like, this isn't how musicals work. And there was a lot of flack for Ben Platt being too old for the role by this point, and I don't really think he looks too old for the role, but maybe his voice sounded a bit too old for it. I don't know, it's hard to say. The film wouldn't have been made if he wasn't in it, so whatever, but maybe it shouldn't have been made because it just didn't quite land right. It also ended up being released basically like right in the midst of COVID times and lockdowns and all the paranoia around that before we were vaccinated for COVID. And so I think that didn't help, because one of the themes in the show is all about like social isolation and how, we can connect with people online and virtually, but it's not the same as connecting people in real life. And you think that would have resonated more during COVID, but it sort of resonated less because it was done from a pre-pandemic point of view where like everyone had all these rich lives, and it was really only Evan who was like this loser who only connected with people online. Whereas they release it in September of 2021 and we're in a lockdown and you're at home watching it, cut off from everyone you know, and it's just like, well, he's at school surrounded by people at least. I don't even get to do that. So like, what's his problem? Yeah, anyway, I don't think that's the whole reason that the film has a bad reputation. I just think it didn't help. Anyway, cut to now. Haven't thought about the show in years, because it sort of fell out of favor after that film and after it closing for pandemic and stuff. And cut to now, it's 2025, and I was thinking, why do this show now? Is it still relevant? How's this gonna hit? I liked it back in the day. It's got really good songs and music, and vocally, the artists really get to show off and stuff. So that's going to be cool, but I've never seen it on stage. And so I don't actually know if it's going to work. And I was a bit hesitant. Well, I needn't have been, because my big takeaway from watching this production is that it works now better than it ever has. I just thought the themes that came out of this show was so much more relevant and made so much more sense to me than they might have back in 2016. And that could be partly due to the direction and the way it was staged and the way that the set looked and stuff, to sort of emphasize some slightly different things. And so I want to get into that, but I think those themes kind of were there all along. They just didn't resonate as much for me personally, and I think for probably the more general public. I feel like there's things that might have affected a section of society that now affect a much larger section of society. Because there's this great theme about social isolation. And what I really loved about this particular production is the way that it's staged and the way that it depicts the way that people are feeling and the way that people are interacting so much through the staging. There's just this really, like, for a lot of the scenes, it's a pretty barren set. Like, when they're at school, there's no set. It's just empty black stage. And, characters come and they have their little interactions. But this has a small cast. There's only 8 people in this show. So it's not like the stage is ever filled with throngs or like, tap dancing chorus boys or anything. Everyone just sort of exists in space and seems distant and isolated. And, then they do sort of interact with each other, but then it doesn't last, and then they go off. And a lot of the interactions when they're at home talking to each other will be like chatting to each other through a computer, like a Zoom kind of thing. I guess this is for Zoom, so like Skype or whatever the young kids were using at the time, I don't know. And so you'll see two people on different parts of the stage, isolated in separate pools of light, and they're talking to each other. And I found it very effective because it really tied in the social isolation and feeling lonely with the onlineness of it all. So they're literally talking to each other. There's no lack of interaction, but it's this virtual, two-dimensional, unsatisfying, unenriching interaction. And what happens as the show goes on is that Evan goes from being only sort of surrounded in this virtual interaction sphere to having more real life experiences, getting to be more comfortable interacting as his full self with real people in real life. And by the end of the show, he's a lot less of a nervous wreck. And yeah, I thought that the way that it's staged just demonstrates that so beautifully. And I picked out things that had just never occurred to me before. Like, one of the biggest songs in the show is Waving Through a Window, and there's a lyric where it's like tap, tap, tapping on the glass. And in the film, he's like literally standing in a window, like staring through it. And it's very literal. And I guess that's what I've always imagined as well. But no, the way that this is done, there's people with cell phones and stuff. And I was like, oh yeah, they're tap, tap, tapping on the glass. They're like waving through a window at each other, but they're not touching each other. They're not connecting. They're not getting that real intimacy that we all long for. And it's cutting them off from each other. There's the screen dividing people. And that just seems so much more relevant now than it did then, because, I mean, have you checked your screen time lately? I mean, I shudder to think what mine is on the daily, like 20 hours out of 24. It just feels like I'm never not in front of a screen. And that must be affecting us all probably in really bad ways. And so, yeah, I just thought this was a really interesting examination of that. And I don't remember that theme being in the film at all. It probably, I think it was in the original stage version, but it just, because I didn't see it, it doesn't come across as much in the lyrics, and I just, yeah, hadn't really occurred to me, and I really enjoyed that about it. And I was like, this is so relevant. Everyone should be seeing this right now, because yes, we all need more real life interactions. The show finished and I said to a friend of mine, I was like, oh, they could have just called it Touch Grass, the musical, because that felt like the moral of the story for me. Because Evan really does go on this journey. He has this emotional arc. And this is another thing that happened after the film came out. There was a bit of backlash around, like, he just does all these like nasty, terrible things to people and lies to them the whole time. And then at the end, I don't know, it's all just supposed to be okay. And I think that the stage version does a much better job of like justifying his actions along the way and showing that he knows that he's hurt people. He regrets it. He owns up to it. The connection that he's got from other people actually gives him the strength to be honest about what he's done and how he's lied. He apologizes. He's contrite. He distances himself from people. And, you know, we have this sort of beautiful epilogue where he meets up with Connor Murphy's sister again, Zoe, and she sort of, you know, basically allows him to know that there was good that came out of it. That yes, he made some bad decisions, but it's kind of like she's forgiven him. The family are not holding it against him. They actually have an increased amount of peace, and like there was some good stuff that came out of it despite the delusion of it all, which it's funny to find myself here, but do you know what that makes me think of? It's like religion, right? You know, like, sure, it might all be based on a lie, but the sense of community is real. So I don't know, putting it through that framework or through that lens, it's like Evan Hansen is just Jesus. I mean, don't be too hard on him. Is that a stretch? Is that a stretch? But the sense of community and connection is real, and that's not nothing. I mean, what else is there? Maybe that's everything. So, yeah, I don't know. Dear Evan Hansen is my religion now. So, yeah, those are my thoughts about the show. I will say one other thing about the show, which is it actually is really clever at how it incorporates Connor, because you've only got 8 actors. This central character to the plot dies very early on. What are you going to do? Just let him sit backstage the whole time? No, he must be earning his wage. And so they incorporate not really like the ghost of Connor, but more like the idea of Connor. He pops in and out of different songs and different scenes, and it's just done in a way that's really like respectful, and you can kind of get what's going on, and it's sort of psychological or imaginative rather than like, spooky, afterlife-y. And I thought it was done really well. And there's moments where he gets to kind of be like this imagined version of Connor that isn't the real Connor. And it's great because it'd be so fun to do as an actor, but it's done really well that you can see the disconnect of like, even though we haven't seen the real Connor very much, we still know that this version of Connor is not the real Connor, it's the imagined version now. It's very clever. I like it. I like it a lot. So yeah, the show will make you cry and make you see dead people. So that's enough about the show. There's still going to be people who don't love it, but for me, this show really, really works, especially this production of it. Another thing that makes this production so special is the cast. Wow, it's a strong cast all around. A lot of like theatre veterans like Verity Hunt-Ballard, who plays the mother of Evan Hansen, and she gets some great vocal moments and stuff, but really stealing the show is Beau Woodbridge as Evan Hansen. And it's such a star vehicle, this show. Like, he's basically on stage the whole time doing all of the things all of the time. So I just don't want to take away from him and talk about anyone else really. Like, he was just wonderful. He has the creamiest, most delicious luxe voice. I could listen to it all day. There's some real vocal gymnastics in this score. I guess that's what we call the music. And he just makes it all seem so effortless. And he's flipping in and out of falsetto, and he goes down to like a more baritone register, and it all just seems so easy, and it all sounds so beautiful, and it blends together nicely. And oh my gosh, just like what a vocal master. And at such a young age, he, I believe, is in his early 20s, but still looks like this 17-year-old kid. So I recommend seeing it just for the vocal prowess of Beau Woodbridge, and he is one to watch. I want to know what he's doing next, and I want to be there in the front row having him sing at me. Yeah, that's probably all there is to say about dear Evan Hansen. So be kind to yourself. If you need anxiety meds, take them. If you want to try stopping them, then maybe tell a few lies and inveigle yourself into a friendly, loving neighborhood family who can like support you through that.